Welcome to the Big Book Club. I'm Damian Barr. We're going out on a high. Tonight's theme is pure gallus. Bold, cheeky, just the right side of wrong. Does it come from the swagger of a cockerel, gallus in the Latin, or from the gallows that somebody, maybe just a bit too gallus, might eventually swing from? Who knows? But you know gallus when you see it, swaying down Sauchiehall Street on a Saturday night. Tonight, we join an intrepid pack of horseback librarians in Kentucky, meet a mother like no other and her equally intrepid son, and embark on a love-hate relationship with a 90s pop star who never was. My gallus guests are Jojo Moyes, Dustin Lance Black, and Kirstin Innes, and we'll have poetry from Jenny Lindsay. I'll also visit a book group in Pumferston to discuss one of this week's reads. My first guest has probably made you cry, but in a good way. She's the author of the multi-million bestsellers, Me Before You and The Last Letter from Your Lover. Strong female characters who don't always know their strengths are her speciality. Her latest book, The Giver of Stars, is set in Depression-era Kentucky. It follows 5 incredible women and their horses on an unforgettable journey through perilous mountains as part of Eleanor Roosevelt's new travelling library. It's Jojo Moyes. I wanted you to ride in on a horse like Studio 54.
They wouldn't let me bring it in. He's outside.
At the end of the show, we'll get him in. Will you give us a wee reason from the book before we have a chat?
I'd love to. I should also apologise in advance to the resident American for the American accents I'm about to attempt.
Oh, I can't wait for this. Yes, go.
This is a short reading where Marjorie, who is from a mountain family in Kentucky, a very notorious family, is having a conversation with Alice, who is an English emigre to the very small and, I won't say repressed, but it has a kind of fairly strict social order and understanding that Alice is still trying to navigate. And she has made friends with Marjorie, the chief librarian on horseback, and they are beginning a tentative friendship. Can I ask you about your family? Alice had said as they saddled up the horses shortly after dawn. Marjorie, her thoughts still lost somewhere in Sven's strong, hard body, had had to be spoken to twice before she realised what Alice was saying. Ask what you want. She glanced over. Let me guess, someone tell you shouldn't be around me because of my daddy? Well, yes, said Alice after a pause. Mr. Van Cleve had given her a lecture on that exact subject the previous evening, accompanied by much spluttering and finger-pointing. Alice had wielded the good name of Mrs. Brady as a shield, but it had been an uncomfortable exchange. Marjorie nodded as if this was no surprise. She swung her saddle onto the rail and ran her fingers over Charlie's back, checking him for bumps and sores. Well, Frank O'Hare supplied moonshine to half the county. Shot up anyone who tried to take over his patch. Shot him if he reckoned they'd even thought about it. Killed more people than I know of and left scars on everyone he was close to. Everyone? Marjorie hesitated a moment, then took a couple of steps towards Alice. She rolled up her shirt sleeve, tugging it above the elbow, revealing a waxy, coin-shaped scar on her upper arm. Shot me with his hunting rifle when I was 11 years old because I sassed him. If my brother hadn't pushed me out of the way, he would have killed me. Alice took a moment to speak. Didn't the police do anything? Police? She said it. Up here, people take care of things their own way. When Memoir found out what he'd done, she took a horsewhip to him. Only 2 people he was ever scared of, his own mum and pop. Marjorie put her head down so that her thick, dark hair fell forward. She ran her fingers nimbly over her scalp until she found what she was looking for and pulled her hair to one side, revealing an inch-wide gap of bare skin. That's where he pulled me up 2 flights of stairs by my hair 3 days after Memoir died. Pulled a handful of it clean out. They say he still had half my scalp attached to it when he dropped it. You don't remember? Ah, no, he'd knocked me out before he did it. Alice stood in stunned silence. Marjorie's voice was as level as always. I'm so sorry, she faltered. Ah, don't be. When he died, there were 2 people in his whole town came to this funeral, and only one of those did because they felt sorry for me. You know how much this town loves to meet up? You imagine how much they hated him to not even show up at a man's funeral? You don't miss him then. Ha! Round here, Alice, you got a lot of what you call sundowners. They're good old boys in daylight hours, but come nightfall, when they get to drinking, they're basically a pair of fists looking for a target. Alice thought of Mr. Van Cleve's bourbon-fueled rants and shivered despite the heat. Well, my daddy wasn't even a sundowner. He didn't need a drink, cold as ice. Don't have a single good memory of him. Not a single one? Marjorie thought for a moment. Oh no, you're right, there was one. Alice waited. Yep, the day the sheriff stopped by to tell me he was dead.
Thank you very much. Dustin, accent check.
I thought it was fantastic. Honestly,
Oh, bless you.
and it's not even an American accent, it's a Southern American accent.
It's a very particular place, that, as well.
My only note is I've never heard a Southerner speak so clearly or so quickly, right?
Have you been in America with it yet? Have you toured in America with it
I
yet?
have, and the most terrifying place to tour it was Kentucky, not just because it was full of people who actually know how to do a Kentucky accent, but because
they're from Kentucky. You know?
Some of the people who'd helped me research it were there as well.
Oh,
so
we'll come to some of those people because they're some amazing characters. Let's talk about the historical and political context.
It's basically based in southeastern Kentucky, which is a place that has been plagued by poverty and social problems for as long as anybody can remember. It was a huge mining district, and as the mines have shut down, poverty has increased. And this was an attempt by President Roosevelt in various parts of the country to push back against what he saw as religious fundamentalism and unscrupulous politicians and a lack of facts, a lack of truth and facts, by educating people who might not otherwise have access to books. And he did that through setting up a scheme whereby women were encouraged to ride into the locality and take books to families who might be wary of, I don't know, a man or, you know, just people from outside the area.
As you were describing that, it sounded like a very contemporary America, where people...
Well, that was what appealed to me. I saw the pictures of these black and white pictures in the Smithsonian magazine of these women. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. And there they were, kind of very proud on their mules or horses, their packs lined with books, about to head off riding 120 miles a week. And I just thought, this is a modern story, you know, everything from the pushback against feminism and the patriarchy to the rape of the landscape by corporations to, you know, people feeding off other people's lack of knowledge. I mean, it's terrifying how modern it is.
You said there President Roosevelt, but I think, was it not Eleanor Roosevelt?
She was a big
we're talking
part,
about Gallus.
yeah.
I mean, Eleanor Roosevelt,
yes.
I mean, there's a woman. You know.
And a very, I didn't realise quite how controversial Eleanor Roosevelt was even in her own lifetime because, you know, she had opinions and the spread of knowledge has always been seen as a threat, especially when granted to women.
What was it like going there to do the research? Because you did spend quite a bit of time there.
I did. I went out 3 times in the end. And I knew I needed to go there because it felt like an audacious thing to try and write about a piece of American history to start with. And I just think you have to pay your subject respect. But then I discovered that it was this tiny little place that I was due to visit, which was where one of the Librarians set up, was the pretty much the opioid capital of America. It was I think the 3rd poorest state in America, highest crime levels. I mean, just,
Scary.
and I'd booked my tickets and and I went thinking I was going to hate it. And the strangest thing happened, which is I completely fell in love with it. It was so not what I'd expected. The landscape is extraordinary. What is particular to this area is the Holler, H-O-L-L-E-R, which is a sort of, almost like a valley between 2 sets of mountains. So you have this huge, vast, mountainous landscape, and it's flinty, and it's, you know, it's a hard scrabble existence. And you see these tiny shacks that are in the middle of nowhere, and you think that is a hard life. But it's beautiful, and because I think it's one of those places that people aren't particularly on the tourist trail, Series A, it's kind of, apart from the scars of corporate culture, is kind of unscathed in a lot of places. But for me, it was the people. They were so not what I'd expected. I was afraid that it was going to be a very far right, very traditional place, and it just wasn't. It was far more nuanced and interesting, and that was one of the things that really made me want to be careful in how I represented the mountain people, the Appalachian people, because what I discovered from talking to them was there's so much bad feeling about how they feel they're always represented as hillbillies. And the truth is always far more interesting. And so that's what I was trying to get across.
Does that sound like the South, you know, a South full of stories?
It brings me so much joy to hear you talk about it like that, because it's where I grew up.
Okay.
And it's, you know, people think of it as this monolithic conservative place, and there is that there, but there's so much else there.
Yes.
And even with the conservative folks, though they don't approve of me or my marriage, you can find great warmth and great stories, amazing food.
Yes,
and
amazing
unexpected
food.
friendships.
Yes.
So I'm so happy to hear that you
No,
discovered
and I'm the least likely person to love a place like that. You know, I'm a kind of London liberal kid, and actually it's my happy place now.
Yeah.
And when I went, I stayed in a tiny cabin on a mountainside that had no Wi-Fi, no telephone, no communications, and it was 5 miles down a dirt track. And I thought, well, this is going to be fine. I'm going to live like they lived, until the first night when I was like, there's no locks on the doors. And
There's no locks on the doors?
No, it's just those little curtain hook things.
That's not a lock.
Well, they were like, why would we have locks? Is nobody here?
Oh my God, that's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, but it was beautiful. And the first night, the whole of this forest, which I had assumed was full of people with Deliverance-style guns and bears and people basically just waiting to come and get me in my cabin, was actually full of fireflies. And I looked out at about 9 o'clock, and it was literally like nothing I'd ever seen, a 3-dimensional, pulsing, white, glittering landscape that segued into the stars above. And it was, and I stopped being frightened. And then I used to hike every day. I would walk into the mountains, and I moved snakes with sticks and lost my fear. And it was probably the safest I've ever felt anywhere.
Tell us about the very gallus Barbara.
Okay, so yes, if there is a gallus spirit in this book, it is because of Barbara. Barbara was 71 when I met her. She's a teeny tiny proprietor of several cabins dotted around this very large holler. And she is a fierce woman, and she has fierce opinions, and she had no compunction about telling me off for things that I'd, you know, she would see everything as well. Like, Jojo Moyes, did I see you moving a snake? And I said, yes. How did you know it wasn't a biter? I said, it didn't look like a biter. And she's like, oh my God, child, you ain't got the sense you was born with.
And that was her.
That was her.
Let's talk about Alice, who's our English Rose, who is, you know, falls in love with an American man and is whisked off to Kentucky. What is she leaving, and what is she hoping to find?
She is somebody who has grown up in a land that I understand a lot better, which is the kind of repressive upper middle class of, you know, the early part of the last century, and where how she is seen is so much more important than who she is. And she has failed in every respect, because she's one of those slightly awkward people who just always manages to say and do the wrong thing. So when this gorgeous, you know, screen idol American guy turns up with his father and falls in love with her, she is very ready to marry in haste because it gets her out of this repressive existence in southeast England. And she thinks she's going to have this amazing life in, you know, New York, or when she hears that it's Kentucky, well, maybe she'll go to the Kentucky races. And what she doesn't realize that she's going to a kind of dirt mining town, miles from anywhere, which lives under its own rules, and those are the rules of her father-in-law. Yeah.
Marry in haste, repent at leisure, and she has time to do that. But she's saved sort of by two things: by Marjorie and by the library.
Yes, because she discovers a purpose. I mean, you know, the life she is expected to lead there is basically ornamental, and she's going slightly crazy, as a lot of women did when they were expected to lead purely ornamental lives. And she, through the library, she gets to know local people. She becomes a little more accepted than she was, because at first she's viewed very much as an outsider, because these were very closed communities, apart from the mines themselves, which were very international, but also completely enclosed little worlds of their own. I mean, for me, it's probably the most overtly political book, but if you weren't looking for politics, you would probably just enjoy a story about a bunch of women finding themselves.
But you say that, but I think, so let's just run through some of the issues that you've covered in your past books. Assisted suicide, collaborating with Germans during the war,
Yeah.
Asbestos poisoning, I could go on. Yeah. I mean, you do love an issue.
I do.
You really do. But I think that because of, you know, the sexist world that we live in, you get dismissed as lady writing smoochy books.
I do. But do you know what? The thing that actually changed the way I felt about it was the late, great Deborah Orr, who is, of course, local to where we are, or was local to where we are.
Just down the road.
Yes, who was probably the most intelligent woman I ever met in my life, and also the fiercest and most terrifying. I once did a charity walk with her where we found ourselves walking next to each other, and I was just walking along slightly terrified, going, I'm walking next to Deborah Orr. She's like this huge brain, newspaper columnist, you know, doesn't suffer fools. And she suddenly said, oh, I liked your book. And I looked at her and she said, yeah, the one about assisted suicide. She said, I thought, you're probably going to change a lot more people's minds writing about it in the accessible way that you do, rather than if I'd written a kind of political tract about it or something. She said, yeah, it was really good. And I was struck dumb. Like, Deborah Orr, A, read my book, but B, thinks that what I do is okay. Yeah. And it actually changed the way I thought about writing accessibly. You know, it's all right to, you know, I don't mind if people write me off as fluffy.
Do you not mind? You do slightly mind.
Okay, I do mind a bit, but do you know what? I can't remember
I mind, and I'm not you, so...
But you know what? 38 million books. I'm not going to moan about much. Get it. Yeah. 38 million. And the really nice thing is when you get letters from people whose minds you have shifted. You must have had this. Yeah. It's just... you catch more flies with honey. It's
vinegar,
just,
I have to let you get back to your horse. Thank you so much for being with me, Jojo.
Thank you for
it was a pure joy. My next guest grew up in a poor family in Texas, raised Mormon in that already God-fearing state, then abandoned by his father before having to flee a violent stepfather. Throughout all his trials, he had his two brothers and his brave, brilliant mother, a polio survivor who redefines resilience and whose heart is as limitless as her hopes for her boys. Mama's Boy is the story of that woman and how her middle son went from being a wee boy to the man he has become. Joining me on the sofa, it's Dustin Lance Black. Hi. It's so lovely to see you.
So good to see you again.
Shimmering like a merman before me.
Well, we don't get out a lot in 2020, do we? So if you're gonna actually leave the house, you may as well sparkle.
Exactly. It's like wearing all the clothes. Will you read us a wee bit before we chat?
Yes. I will read just a bit of the prologue, because I think it sets things up.
It does.
Though it's a slight misdirection, but I'll talk about that after.
Oh, okay.
A hot, gauzy morning in the late summer of 1987. That was the first time I ever laid eyes on the streets of Los Angeles. I was 13 years old, but looked 10 at best, an agonizingly shy Texas boy with eyes like water, hair like the sun, and a tanker truck's worth of secrets. I was jammed in the backseat of my mom's massive yellow Malibu Classic between my little brother Todd and our stinking cat, Airborne. My mom said we were on the move. Others would have called it on the run. Days earlier, my family had packed up what little we had of value and vanished without notice from our lives in the Lone Star State, leaving behind my middle school in San Antonio and our Mormon church in the Randolph Ward, heading west. My mom was behind the wheel, her hairspray-stiffened curls resting on worried shoulders as she worked the hand controls to speed up and slow down her beast of a car, a colossal artifact from a former life that now had to be wrested into submission by a woman who walked on crutches, her legs in braces, her spine fused and held together with metal bars hidden just beneath the scars that ran the length of her body. My big brother Marcus sat up beside her. His hair was just as long as hers, but kissing a black leather punk rock jacket covered in pins and buttons that shouted obscenities my mom had miraculously, if not willfully, grown blind to. He had a map spread out on his lap. We were lost. We were scared. But in good Southern Mormon fashion, we kept our terrors to ourselves. Here's the thing. We'd been taught our entire lives that places like Los Angeles were filled with folks who'd traded their souls and salvation for fame, booze, drugs, cash, cars, heterosex, group sex, and dirty, filthy faggot sex. Los Angeles was the embodiment of an unfamiliar, exotic America that we'd been warned to avoid. Liberal, often coastal, a place for sinners and moral relativists. For our ragtag family on the run, passage through this city was a test of spiritual strength. So we plugged our noses in back. Marcus did his best to navigate up front, and my tiny runaway mom rotated the hand controls that turned the gear, that pressed down on the gas pedal that she hoped might propel us to safety. 2 hours later, Marcus and my mom finally spotted the entrance to the 5 freeway heading north. The terrain grew steeper as we headed into the hills and over the grapevine, a stretch of highway out of LA where the snarl of traffic gave way to golden grasses, a reservoir lake, ranches, and a meadow filled with wildflowers. These were more familiar sights. This felt more like home. My mom looked up into her rearview mirror, found my eyes, and with all of her mighty love and warmth, sent me a strong, silent message. You're safe now, my Lancer. But as you know, if you read the book, I was far from safe.
Yeah.
And that city that I was forbidden to go near, that we thought was filled with so many sinners and moral relativists, was calling for me, and it would end up being my home. And I think utilizing those things that my mother was most afraid of, understanding them, is how I came to be who I am, which is much of what the book is about. What I gained from having a mom, how do you say it?
Gallus.
With Gallus.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's talk about Anne. Where was she born, and what kind of family was she born to?
One that is so different than where I am now. I mean, she was born in Lake Providence, Louisiana, which is still the poorest city in the United States of America. It is incredibly racist. There is a divide, there's a river that runs through it, and if you have money and if you're white, you live on the north side, and if you don't have money, and usually if you're black, you live on the south side. My family, because my grandmother, Koki, was so poor, married so young, started having children at 13 with her husband, who was 14. They lived on the south side. So they lived on a tenant farm. And, you know, this was her existence. This is how she lived and grew up. It's all she knew was this paper brick home, you call it, where you could see clean through the walls, up on stilts because it would flood consistently. And, you know, had a bunch of siblings. And so when that day came, when at 2 years old, my mother started complaining that her legs hurt. And everyone thought she was just, you know, being a 2-year-old. But by midnight, she couldn't move them. By 1 a.m., she couldn't breathe on her own. And this family, with no money, with nothing to their name, had to figure out how to keep that little girl alive. And when they got her to a hospital across the state line in Vicksburg, Mississippi, mother and daughter were stripped of all their clothes. The clothes were burned. My mother, at 2 years old, unable to breathe, was isolated. Some of this is probably starting to sound familiar because my mother's illness was a sign that a plague, an epidemic, was coming for the South again. And of course, it would take my mother's ability to walk clean away for all of her life. A woman who was told time and again all of the things she would never, ever, ever be able to do.
Never be able to walk, work, have children.
Go to college, fall in love, you know, go to a prom, you know, certainly was never gonna have a career, help change the world. She was told, you know, for you, you can just be on the government dole. That's what your life is going to look like.
Let's talk about how your mum managed to survive that and get to the stage in her life where she could do all the things and give us you.
Well, I mean, I think some of it is inherited, some of it's in her bones. I'm gonna say it wrong again, Gallus.
Gallus.
I keep saying it like it's like Spanish or
Say
something.
Alice.
Alice.
Put a G on the front.
Gallus.
There you go.
I got it from now on. Gallus. I mean, my grandmother, a fierce survivor, a fierce protector of her children, You know, she did not have the easiest love life. Men came and went, but she was there for her kids. And I think my mother saw that can-do attitude and was like, well, why should I go on the government dole? Why can't I have a job, a career, and become educated? Why can't I fall in love and go to the prom? And so a nurse, when she survived a surgery that had left her in a coma, when she came out of it, instead of big congratulations and we're so glad to have you back, a nurse set her down, a realist, which is often my least favorite kind of a person, and told her all the things that she would not be able to do, the things that we've listed. And I believe my mom took that checklist and said, I am going to prove her wrong on every single count, except that I know I'll never walk again. And I do believe, starting with sewing her own prom dress, and damn it, getting up on those braces and crutches and going to prom with no date, that's what began. That's how it began. A can-do, self-sufficient attitude that she was not going to take to believe what other people said was possible for her. I guess I took it for granted in many ways, because by the time I came into the world, she had fallen in love. And she had miraculously had 3 kids the doctor said she'd never be able to have, including me. I think that was so incredibly inspiring to me. It's also made me a bit of a pain in the ass, because whenever someone says, well, you can't do that, or it doesn't work that way, or that's not possible, or it's too soon for gay rights in America, I say, no, 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 no. Not with a grandmother like Cokie, who survived with 9 kids, and a mom like Anne, who got up on those crutches and ended her career working in the most esteemed hospital in the United States of America, Walter Reed, which we've heard a lot about this year, running the laboratory there.
She worked there?
She worked there where the president goes for care.
In the book, you talk about being quiet for a lot of the time and that being a source of concern for everybody around you. I mean, it seemed to me like everybody was talking and telling stories the whole time, and you were listening and observing, but you were quiet. Why was that?
I mean, I grew up in a world where being different was bad. I saw also how my mother was treated when she went out into the world. And she was not treated fairly. She was not treated kindly. You know, the people staring at her weren't staring at her because they thought she was beautiful. They thought maybe she was too freakish and strange for them, because she did look different. She looked quite different. You know, the scoliosis had her spine shaped like an S. And I was afraid of difference. The Mormon church taught me to be afraid of difference. The South taught me to be afraid of difference. We were a military family. That told me you were supposed to be one kind of thing. And here I was, starting at 6 years old, knowing I had a crush on my big brother's best friend. I was too different for the world. And I didn't want to stick out. So I didn't want to excel. I didn't want to be heard. Safety was being alone. Safety was being quiet. Safety was listening more than talking. And so, yeah, I didn't talk for a couple of years. I think I've made up for lost time.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah, I think you're making up for it. What was the point? I mean, it was LA, I guess, wasn't it? And discovering theatre and discovering the people who loved theatre that enabled you to feel like you could express a part of yourself that you weren't able to express at home.
I think so. I think it was a series of events that you come to learn in the book.
Yeah.
One of them was watching my 40-something-year-old paralyzed mother, twice divorced with 3 kids, start an illicit affair with a 20-year-old Army soldier she was training in the hospital that she worked at the time. And when everyone said that was wrong, the Mormon church said, get out of here doing that sort of thing. The military didn't approve. The South thought it was too racy. My family thought it was too racy. My mom married him. And when he got orders to ship out to California, we went with him. And yeah, at that point I said, I guess when you're passionate about something, when you love something or someone, you should fight for that.
You're like, and now I'm married to Tom Daly.
Well, you know, and there's this same age gap. Like mother, like son. It's true. I understood that my mom, in some ways, when it came to love, when it came to protecting the things she loved, she was a rule breaker. I started to understand that some rules aren't written in stone. In fact, most aren't.
But she was Your mother, though, was very, and this is one of the striking things about the book, is that, yes, she loved you, yes, she loved her children, she was very, you know, fierce in her defence and love for you, but she was very conservative. She was very invested in the church. It's not like she was in there being, you know, like sort of, you know, liberal thorn in the side of the Mormons. She was fully invested. That had to make it scary for you. The person you love the most in the world, you know,
it was
rejecting you possibly.
My mother was conservative. She voted conservative, a Southern Republican Mormon. And here I am, particularly as I start coming up in the world, gay, living on the coasts, voting for Democrats. We could not be more different politically. And I remember my mom just a few years, well, now a handful of years back, saying to me, I'm starting to have fights with my family. And I'm starting to have fights with my family over politics. And in fact, I'm not talking to your aunt right now over a fight we've had about politics. And she started to worry. In fact, she was the one, she says, I just feel like a storm is coming in this country. Because she was so tight with her little family of survivors. If politics could begin to divide them, boy, who's gonna stick together in this time? And I just, as I watch people feud and fight over politics, which are important, they shape our lives and protect us, the laws that they create. But when I watch it separate friendships and families, I think we've gone too far. And the fact, it's why I wrote the book, the fact that my mom and I could stay as close as we stayed, to love each other and find those ways to connect despite the political divide, that's the harder way to go, the more worthy way to go. If you look around yourself, at your family, at the world, and we can use our eyes and see it, all of its beauty, and you're going to tell me that the highest plane of existence as a human being on this planet today is whether you're registered as a Republican or a Democrat, right? As Labor or Tory, you're gonna tell me that's the highest plane of existence and will define who you allow yourself to have relationships with, friendships with, family. I say that's mental illness. And I think the planet right now is mentally ill. And I hope they pick up this book. You know what? I'll piss off my publisher, steal it for free off the internet, and read. Read how people can come together despite political divides and still be families, and still find love and connection. And guess what the unexpected side effect of that is? You quickly realize you agree on far more than you disagree. Let's get mentally and emotionally healthy again and sit down at that most powerful stage in the world there is for change. And it's called the dining room table in your own home, and have those tough conversations. Lead with love, lead with stories, lead with your heart. That is your truth. That can change a mind, and a mind can change a heart. And I do believe it is the only way out of this mental illness that we are stuck in as a humankind in the year 2020.
Stories are what will fix it, I think. I really believe that. And thank you for sharing your story, and your mum's so much.
Thank you so much.
Scabby Queen depicts the rise and demise of fictional pop star and protest queen Cleo Campbell. It's not giving anything away to tell you the novel opens with Cleo's untimely death. We then hear bits of her life story from the people who knew her best, or thought they did. The novel takes us from the 1990s to now, from the Poll Tax Riots to Brexit and the independence referendum. It tackles fame and feminism, passion and politics. And throughout it all, there's no doubting the gallousness of Cleo Campbell or of her creator, Kirstin Innes. Before Kirstin joins me, I met up with the book group to find out what they thought. So I've come to the delightfully named Pumferston in West Lothian to meet a very international book group composed of doctors and producers, medics, artists, scientists. I'm interested to hear all their different perspectives. Morning, everybody.
Hi.
How are we?
Yeah, great, thank
Yes.
you.
Thanks for arranging the weather as well. So who started the group and what are you called?
I did, but we don't have a name. We did talk about it, but we don't have a name.
What's your WhatsApp group called then?
Book club?
Oh, just book club. Okay. So how long have you been a member?
So, well, in the first months, I think. So
yeah.
I think the first book we kind of all read together.
Yeah.
So, yes, at the very beginning as well.
So you're quite an international group. Does it give you a chance to make friends locally?
Yeah, it does actually, especially if you kind of move from another country to be here. And I also like the mix of the science and the arts, because you would assume that there's a head and a heart operating, but the perspectives are so different.
I adore talking about books and sharing conversations with people.
Just to get all these different voices from very different backgrounds and to hear how everyone has interpreted the same book it's just fascinating. It's great fun.
In my job, it's my opinion. There's no one you're consulting with. It's whatever you think. But when you come across a book group, the idea is hearing difference of opinion, and it kind of shakes you out of your comfort zone, and I really like that.
Scabby Queen by Kirstin Innes starts with a death. It's the apparent suicide of Cleo Campbell, one-time pop star, poll tax rebel. It's told by the people who love her, the people who think they love her, and the people who definitely hate her. So what did you think of Scabby Queen?
I really like that her story is told through the lens of all these different people. So I found that part really interesting, actually, and that way of writing. That's never actually written through the perspective of Cleo. It's all these other people seeing Cleo at different stages of her life in different situations.
I found that a little bit frustrating, and it took me, and I think maybe it's on purpose, that she wants you to really only have a bit of a kaleidoscopic view of Cleo, but in some way it meant I was less attached to Cleo, I think, because I just felt maybe not strongly enough about her because it was so disjointed.
The complexity of someone's life, I appreciated, absolutely. The one-hit wonder aspect is fascinating, and I also was interested to know, is that a real person? That because I didn't grow up here, I have no idea. I didn't know about that period of history very well.
I think it's interesting that I didn't think of one real pop star or former pop star, but I thought of lots of different bits of lots of different characters who were around at that time. I think that's one of the things that really worked in the book for me, was that I felt like here I was hearing about a pop star that I'd somehow missed.
I think the scope of the novel is quite incredible and far-reaching. It's a take on feminism. There are a lot of male hands on the small of her back throughout the novel.
Yeah.
It's a take on fame. It's a take on the music industry.
It feels very real, her feminism. What she says about makeup, for instance, you know, when she lives in the squat, the anarchist squat in London, and she gets criticized by the bougie women, the upper-class, middle-class women, and says, oh, you're just, you know, serving patriarchy by putting lipstick on. And she has this really quite heartfelt speech about, you know, you have no idea about what it is for a working class woman to have to put on the makeup as an armor against the world. I really love that.
Okay, so thanks for having me today. I've really loved it. It's been great to meet you all. I'll leave you to it. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. I've left them scoring the book. I couldn't be there for that bit. It's another book group that I'm going to have to join. It was fascinating to hear all the different perspectives, not just from all around the world, but from the world of science and the world of art. And I tell you what, it wasn't always what I expected. The book group loved it, you'll be pleased to hear. And one of the things they loved most was arguing about who disliked Cleo the most. It was one of those really, really enjoyable books where the central character is not likeable and doesn't have to be. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Will you give us a wee reading?
Yeah. So, even though this is right from the middle, there are 20, I need to get this number right, there are 26, I think, narrators of this book. So you don't actually hear from the central character, Cleo, that often, but I gave her a few wee speeches, and this is one of them. So,
right.
Here we go. Listen, let me tell you something. In the town where I grew up, the women were glamorous. I'd watch my mum getting ready for a night out at the Labour Club, the same place she went to every Saturday night. Sat in the same seats in the lounge, drank the same gin out the same glass, probably. And she treated it like, I don't know, the Oscars or something, mate. I'd watch her piling blue eyeshadow up to her brows, doing that Liz Taylor sweep with a pencil all the way round. She'd have the rollers in for 4 hours before she went out. She'd spot clean her best suit or her old dress and have it hanging up in the kitchen by the kettle. She made her face up like it was an art. And my stepdad, he'd put his suit on and a fresh tie, offer her his arm, and they'd step out into the street with all the neighbours they saw every day for work or the shops, all of them done. All of them with that Saturday night sparkle on, like it would be a dishonour to step out without it, like it was church or something. And the Labour Club, that same old building with its tired walls and the haze of fag smoke, that would become somewhere else, just with one wee tinsel curtain hanging over the stage, the sparkly bow tie on the old boy who sang Sinatra well into his 70s. I'd be allowed to go along and stay up too late, bag of crisps and a bottle of ginger, forming a gang who crawled under the tables with all the other wains. I'd sit there, watching the women's faces, the laughs they put on, the shimmering rainbows round their eyes, mysterious streaks of dark stuff cutting through their round cheeks. And I'd understand they were all casting a spell. They were all, by the power of these potions, by mutual agreement, transforming this place where people worked hard jobs for never enough money, where every choice was difficult, where everything was functional and ugly, into Hollywood or Las Vegas, some projection of what they'd seen in the movies, where the same old spouse you woke to every night was suddenly Lee Majors or Farrah Fawcett, where you lived next door to Burton and Taylor, where old Archie from up the Lone really was a member of the Rat Pack, where money didn't have to matter just this once. And it could only be sustained if everyone kept buying into it together. Oh my God, when there was a wedding, Doreen, who did the hair, was booked out from 6 a.m. and there were always some fancy ones who'd get the train through to Ayr for it, make the journey back with these beehives and sculptures poking out over the top of their coats. What my mother taught me was that you always look your best. It was a matter of honour with her. You let it all go, you might as well shout to the world that things are sliding, that you're not coping. It lets the rest of the team down when they're dealing with things just as hard and worse. She never let anyone outside of me and my stepdad see her in her house coat. I hardly ever saw her without her makeup on the whole time I was growing up with her. It's a working class thing, this. You don't get to tell a working class woman that her lipstick is new feminist because it's a signal of solidarity. This is a great big slash of solidarity I'm wearing across my face right now.
Love it. That is pure working class Scottish feminism right there.
Yeah.
I read that and I was like, I have met those women. I have been, they're my aunties. You know, they're every older, like my mum's pals.
Yep.
Loved them.
They're my in-laws, a massive, massive tribe of in-laws, all women, 8 aunties on either side, all still living more or less in the same housing scheme in Falkirk where my partner grew up.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's them.
That's them?
Yeah.
That's your tribute to them?
That's my tribute to them.
And that's Cleo's mum?
That's Cleo's mum.
Right, who is not, she's not an easy character.
No,
she's
not.
I mean, I wouldn't want her as my mum.
No, I wouldn't want her as my mum either.
Tell us about her.
Cleo's mum is Eileen, who marries in haste because Cleo is on the way.
Theme.
Repents, certainly, for the next 5 years anyway. She marries Malcolm, who's a charismatic musician and drifter from the Highlands. And so she marries the absolute wrong person for her. But Eileen's from a mining town in Ayrshire. And she's very invested in that community and in the solidarity of that fight, and goes on to be involved in the miners' strikes. And so I suppose you could say one of the things she bequeaths her daughter is a sense of solidarity or an idea of it to be strived for.
She has solidarity with her class, but she doesn't have solidarity with her own daughter.
With her own daughter, no, certainly not. I was kind of looking at how the ways these kind of political tribes, like Lance was saying there, the tribes that people choose to belong to, and the ways that those sort of become informing, you know, how you interact or dismiss other people. That was one of the things that was one of the many things that was powering me through this book, for sure.
Oh, it's an essential theme of the novel. So Cleo is her daughter, and Cleo, as you say, is a character who's refracted through all the other characters in the book. We get a kind of kaleidoscopic vision of Cleo. So we can agree she's got red hair.
Yeah.
We can agree on the lipstick. We know that she appeared on Top of the Pops, turned on all the dads, turned off quite a few of the mums, but excited a few of them as well. And she had this one-hit wonder song, Rise Up.
Yeah, I was interested in how you can build up a portrait of a person, how you can think you know somebody if they're in the public eye, how you think you know somebody just by your own assumptions, but how somebody else 5 minutes away can have a completely different perspective of that person. And I'm interested in all these tiny little grey areas and where the actual human being is. So she goes on Top of the Pops with her anti-poll tax anthem, and she refuses to mime, and she decides to strip off her top to reveal an anti-poll tax t-shirt underneath, which kind of captures the imagination of television. So she's a one-hit wonder, but she's a one-hit wonder who's lodged in people's minds for decades.
Yeah, because of the music and because of the politics,
Yeah.
this rebelliousness.
Yeah.
It's interesting as a character, whether or not I wanted more or less of her. There were points where I thought, I don't think she did do that. Like things that characters said that they thought she'd done. Kind of gossip spreads through the book about her, and one character picks up a story and another character picks it up. And at points I felt quite protective of her, like she was being defamed. And then at other points I thought, well, no, she probably did do that. When you were writing it, like, was she sort of in the background shouting at you, going, "Put me in"? Did you put it? You just never did that?
It was always my conception right from the beginning. I wanted to write about the sort of person who kind of bulldozes through life, makes very, very short-term friendships and relationships very intense, blows them up, moves on to the next person. But I wanted to write about it from the point of view of the people left behind, the people in her wake. That was the first kind of instinct that I had when I started this book.
She's highly political about the poll tax. And for her, this is a sort of nascent nationalism in the sense Thatcher's trying this out in Scotland, and you know it's incredibly unfair to her, and she's a big part of that.
Yeah.
And she's then goes on tour, which we can only describe as possibly the least successful pop tour ever. And it's kind of like an anti-tour in a way.
Yeah.
It seems to me like she went on tour to make people hate her. She goes to like increasingly small church halls all across Scotland and berates every single person that turns up. And then she reanimates with the cause of independence. What does independence mean to Cleo?
Cleo would always say that she lived life in solidarity and she was motivated by injustice. And she is driven always to try and fight for the underdog, she would say, to fight against injustice. So if she sees an imbalance of power, she will be in there, she will be making a noise about it, she will be... I was really interested in the somebody who can sustain a life in activism for that long when it can be an exhausting thing as well, as some of her former campaigners say to her.
I mean, she does leave a lot of people in her wake. There's the scene where she goes to visit her former friend, who's now, by the way, in Greece running a yoga retreat, having quite a nice, quiet life to herself, and upturns Cleo, you know, to sort of basically give her a hard time.
Yeah, Xanthi is on her lovely Greek island at Santorini, by the way, running a yoga retreat that I might have attended while I was writing this book.
You'd gone there to get away from your book, you were doing Downward Dog, and you were like, oh, I'm just going to set a scene here. It's always the way, isn't it, when you're writing, everything somehow ends up being co-opted into your novel.
Well, the sections in Brixton, that all kind of came about serendipitously. So in the 90s, Cleo lives in a squat in Brixton, and I went down to Brixton to promote my first book, intending to stay a night, and ended up staying a couple of weeks just to kind of...
in the squat?
No, not in the squat. No, in an Airbnb around the corner.
I was just like, publishers' budgets are low, but I didn't know that they were that low. They were like, this is your squat.
But the second night that I was there, I met this guy in a bar who started, I'd describe him as an old crusty. He was great, and he started telling me all about the history of the squats that they had in the Arches and the 121 Centre on Railston Road, where one of my characters, Sammy, ends up working. And at the time, the news about the spy cops was breaking as well, and I was actually reading that book while I was down there, the Guardian journalist's book about the spy cops who had undercover police officers who had infiltrated activist circles, and it all just seemed to come together.
Let's talk about that story, because I think it's fascinating. You know, it's cops who were given approval by the police service to seduce and have sex with activists who believed that they were activists, and in some cases, you know, get them pregnant, have children, and then you know, I think they mostly just disappeared. But I mean, you know, that's the personal injustice that fuels Cleo, isn't it?
Yeah, that one fuels her a good deal, because Cleo was lived in that squat. She wasn't the woman who got pregnant, but yes, they always pick married men with families to do this because they would be less. They would always have something to pull them out. They would be less likely to.
Oh, so they would leave basically.
Yeah.
It was a job.
Yeah, but in the playbook, and they were given, basically a playbook. One of the first moves was establish a relationship with a female activist, because that way you've got credibility. You've got, you've got an end to the circle. You're not suspicious. You're somebody's boyfriend.
Oh my God.
I was reading that. I couldn't move past it. I was in Brixton at the time. It seemed to make sense to kind of set a section of the story there, and the character Sammy just kind of grew out of what I was seeing and what I was thinking about. And she's probably the character that I'm emotionally closest to out of all my 8,000 narrators in this book. But yeah, so.
How do you mean?
Just in terms of, I don't know, I spent longer with her. I really wanted to get that character right. I spent longer thinking how she would feel. She discovers the betrayal that the man who'd fathered her child, when that child is 15. Cleo comes beeling back into her life, announcing that her ex-boyfriend was actually an undercover cop, that everything she thought was a lie. And I wanted to just spend time thinking how that would feel, what that would do to your ability to form relationships, your ability to trust. And ultimately that becomes quite a through line in the book, where Cleo is unable to see the damage that her pursuit for justice is causing to Sammy in this book.
Yeah, she seems to not care.
I don't know if she didn't care. I think
she doesn't. To me, she started out caring, and then she cared more about the justice than about her friend.
Yeah. It's always kind of about the fight, because she's very, very much Eileen's daughter, as we discover throughout the book. But yeah.
I absolutely loved the book, even if I didn't always absolutely love Cleo. I did absolutely love the book, and it reminded me a lot of Muriel Sparks' The Public Image, which is a book that just isn't read enough.
I was actually reading it as I was finishing this book, the idea of, can you control your public image? Do you know, I hadn't actually made that connection until you said it this evening. But yes, it was there. The lead character in The Public Image, which was Muriel Sparks' Booker nominated book. The lead character is a film actress, an English film actress living in Rome, and she decides to take control of her public image, and her husband also tries to manipulate the media around her to her detriment. And it's a very, do you know, actually, it's Muriel Sparks' it's the most sympathetic she is to a lead character. Usually she has no place in her heart for her characters at all. She treats them like...
I felt like that was the novel where she was talking a wee bit about her own experience of fame.
Yeah,
I think that was that. Lance, I'm thinking about how the things that we hear about you, or the things that you hear about yourself in the press, the sense of public image, like, how much thought do you give to that, especially now that we live in social media, you've got a young family, how do you tackle that? Or do you not even think about it?
It's all 100% accurate, so what's the problem? Yeah,
I'm sure.
They tell the truth all the time. They always get it right. I mean, I think at a certain point you realize, even when there's no malice, they get it so wrong that you have to come to a place where you don't care.
Right.
And I think one of the things my mother taught me was other people's opinions are none of your business. And so you have to, don't read the papers, and if you accidentally do, it's none of your business.
That's very salutary advice. So I'm just going to log off Twitter forever. That's exactly it.
By the way,
we should all do that.
Yeah.
Forever.
It does start to feel that way. I have a question for you from the book group. It's from Magnus. I think it's one of the best questions we've had all series. And the question is this: if Scotland had voted for independence, then would Cleo still be alive now?
Oh, wow. That is an amazing question. Wow. I really, really, really don't know. because
I love that you wrote it and you don't know. That's the best ever. It's like the characters are so real, they've just decided. You just don't get to know.
Yeah, but no, I don't know, because I wrote the whole book, I conceived of the whole book in a post-2014 landscape and mindset. Maybe I wouldn't even have written this book had that happen. So
Oh, that's really interesting.
yeah. The independence referendum section was the section I came to last because I needed a bit of time to work out how I was feeling about it, and it took a wee bit of bravery to get to that one. So that I wrote just before I handed the book in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving us Cleo, who I look forward to seeing in a TV adaptation soon and being annoyed by, but also charmed by. Can't help it. Thank you. Our poet tonight is one of Scotland's most established spoken word artists, performing something from her latest collection, this script. It's Jenny Lindsay. Jenny, what are you going to read for us?
I'm going to do one of my more gentle poems, actually, from my book, which is full of raucous performance poems about schisms and feminism and all the rest. But I'm going to do one for you called An Invite to Your Baby Shower or Your Child's Birthday Party.
Take it away.
They don't make them like they used to. Don't make women like your grandad, nor daughters like your ma did, or girls like this absence in the shape of a child. I'll send best wishes. Maybe I might come sip awkward Prosecco at the Barbie, get accidentally pished, like my aunties did. But never ask me of ideal worlds, or if this choice is choice. Or look at me knowingly when you hear I'm in love now. There is no path but the one that's walked. This hello, welcome to the world, I wish you wonder, joy, nae larkin, is all I have to give at present. This cradled hope, though, no gifts were asked for, no gifts demanded.
Thank you, Jenny. That's it for tonight and for this series. So thank you to the book group and to my guests, Jenny Lindsay, Jojo Moyes, Dustin Lance Black, and Kirstin Innes. Until next time, happy reading.